and welcome to today's webinar, a conversation with women leaders in health IT. Thank you for joining us, and before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to go over a few administrative details. As you have noticed upon joining the webinar, everyone has been placed on mute for the presentation, rather the conversation. At the end of the conversation, there will be a Q&A session. In your GoToMeeting control panel, you will see a questions box. Please type your questions or comments into the field and hit enter. And please feel free to do this during the conversation, and we'll be monitoring those questions so we can ask our wonderful panelists to address your questions as well. And we are recording, so this webinar, along with the slide deck, will be posted to the special weve channel for our webinars, and downloading instructions as well as the slide deck will be emailed to all of you following the live webinar. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to go ahead and hand it over to today's moderator, our weve board chair-elect, Nancy Spector.
Thank you, Sam. And I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon, and hope that you enjoy our conversation that we're going to have with Alex Goss and Robin Thomasauer. I'm going to start with Alex Goss. She is Vice President and Senior Consultant at Imprado, Dynavet Solutions. She is a member of the National Committee on Vital and Health Statistics and is a co-chair of its Standards Subcommittee. So with that, Alex, can you tell us more about your career and what brought you into health IT?
Thank you, Nancy. I appreciate weve's invitation to be an inaugural guest, along with Robin, in the Women in Technology webinars. Learning from the experiences of others can be rewarding, and I'm happy to share my journey in hopes that it will spark the passion of others in health IT field, leading to further improvements in our healthcare system. My journey to health IT was influenced at the beginning of my career by three key factors: a college degree, my mother, and a deep-seated experience as a teenager. I graduated with a degree in public administration and quickly learned that contacts and relationships are key to opening doors, and that once the door opens, it's up to me to make something of it. The summer I graduated from college, my mother learned about a management trainee program during a game of bridge. The program was in the Medicare Part B division of a large insurance company. The opportunity interested me because of a hospital volunteer work that I had done in high school. There are images from more than 35 years ago that are still fresh, like the young man whose hand was severely damaged during a military exercise, the frailty of an elderly patient, and the stress of a family anxiously waiting to see their loved one after surgery or to be permitted into ICU. I had the privilege of spending 6 months learning Medicare Part B operations from mailroom to post-adjudication appeals. I spent 3 years in operations management before pivoting to staff support. Think of this as internal consulting. For more than a decade, I focused on implementing federal regulations and translating those obligations into technical and workflow requirements, leveraging technology to support efficient and compliant operations. I worked on many projects, including system migrations and being assigned to various departments across the enterprise. I was one of a handful of Medicare contractor staff funded to participate in X12's EDI standards development. My X12 experiences led me to consulting. This included roles as a project manager for CMS on their transactions and CodeSec complaints, supporting development of CAQH Core's Phase 2 eligibility rules, and assisting organizations with their strategic implementation of HIPAA. I also worked for a vendor providing EFT and ERA solutions. In 2008, I joined the Governor's Office of Healthcare Reform in Pennsylvania to focus on health information exchange. Ultimately, I worked with a team to stand up an independent state agency overseeing health information exchange in Pennsylvania. After an 8-year run in state government, I decided to go back to consulting. Currently, I work for Dynavet Solutions in their managerial consulting division, Imprado. I work with clients to strengthen their organizations and initiatives to achieve healthier and more productive people. I continue to support national standards as a consultant and a volunteer, which includes my consultant role with the Da Vinci Project Management Office. As a volunteer, I'm serving my second term on the National Committee for Vital and Health Statistics and also sit on ONC's FAST Steering Committee in addition to being co-lead of their directory, version, and scale Tiger team. My path was not an intentional line of sight trajectory to health IT. Rather, it was an evolution fueled by listening to my heart and obtaining wise counsel to hone in on what made the most sense to extend my experiences while making a difference.
Thanks, Alex. Very interesting, and we're really glad that you are here with us today. So our second guest is Robin Thomashauer, and she is president of CAQH. Robin, can you tell us more about your career? What brought you into health IT?
Sure. Thank you also for inviting me and enabling me to participate today. So I did not intentionally wind up in health IT. I started out in healthcare administration. My master's is in that arena, and started out in hospitals where I will say this was quite a while ago, and the only area at that time where there was health IT being used was in accounts payable, patient billing, and in the laboratory. Working in the lab with the lab staff, I got to know Igor, which was their computer, and they named him Igor because it meant in garbage, out rubbish. And that's when I really started to understand how technology can or might not effectively support the operations of the hospital. The quality of the data was critical, and back in those days, not quite as disciplined as it is today. Through the years in hospitals, I got to understand how better the technology could support both the clinical and the administrative side. When I left hospitals and moved on to Kaiser Permanente, I was managing facilities and started to understand there, back in those days, again, not broad use of technology, certainly not in the clinical arena, but more in the administrative. However, when I walked in the first day, I got to know the appointment clerks, and I got to see their books and how they would toss them literally across the table to each other when a patient came in to want to make an appointment with a provider. Over time, we got rid of those books and moved to technology support for appointment making and, of course, for a lot of other administrative functions. But again, the quality of the data being used is really what fascinated me and really where I focused a lot, because unless it was going to be the quality we needed, it wasn't going to have the outcomes that were intended. I was at Kaiser for 15 years, and during that time, we automated quite a few of our processes. But in all cases, really, the technology was about supporting the outcomes that we're looking for, not about the technology itself. So that time was very instructive for me as I moved on in my career. I did some consulting with PwC for a few years, which is how I wound up with CAQH, which at the time was just a group of health plan CEOs who wanted to improve the payer-provider relationship, not talking specifically about technology, but reflecting back on my experience at Kaiser, and I should mention, where after several years wound up having the technology department report to me, started thinking about how could we use technology to solve the problems that these CEOs were talking about. And so that's how we wound up where we are today, which is working across the industry to improve the payer-provider relationship, and in large part using technology to do so. But again, focusing on what are the problems we're trying to solve and how can technology be used to do so, either using the rules that core writes to solve those problems in a more vendor agnostic way, or to use some of the solutions that we've created using technology. So while I didn't intend to wind up in this arena, I think that for me, it has been really exciting to see how we can use it to solve some of those problems that I've known about for a long time, but had not specifically targeted technology to solve.
Great, very interesting again, in terms of your background. And we're really happy again to have you here to talk to today. So Alex, when people say that you're a woman leader in health IT, what goes through your head? Do you think of yourself that way?
That's a great question, Nancy. First, I'm a business person who plays well with health IT, the truly techie folks. Second, I think of myself as a leader in health IT. Third, glass ceilings and pay differentials are real, and mostly I've chosen to look beyond those to focus on the balance I need for me and my family. This takes blending financial aspects with working on interesting and challenging projects. I'm certainly strong and capable, and this creates its own challenges in business, whether you're a man or a woman. It is uncomfortable to a group to have their status quo challenged. At my core, I believe you have to be willing to ask why, listen to the answers, and collaborate with others in taking on the hard issues if you want to make a difference. Being a leader takes strength and humility regardless of your gender. As a leader in health IT, I'm deeply influenced by the life lessons I've learned from my family. I grew up in a family where all of us were expected to be competent, capable, and contribute. This includes a strong education, social skills, and confidence. I'm proud to say I come from a long line of progressive, smart women, like my grandmother and great aunt, who had their law degrees in the 1920s. They were adventurous, too. They traveled the world, including driving from Ohio to Mexico for summer vacations in the late 1940s. Beyond the genetic predisposition to be a strong woman, my parents provided clear expectations and guiding hands to help me navigate experiences that would shape me into an independent thinker, to respect what I don't know, to pursue my passions, and help others. All health IT leaders face challenges, and calling out the gender aspect may perpetuate stigmas. I hope my achievements as a manager, consultant, state health IT coordinator, business executive, and national advisor helps break down unnecessary barriers, ensuring we all have equal opportunities for education and workforce entry in equal paying position is really important. Thanks for that question, Nancy.
Sure. Robin, what about you? Do you think of yourself as a woman leader in health IT or just a leader in health IT?
Very different background, but similar answer to Alex's. Growing up, I was the oldest, and my father had expectations that I would succeed and imbued that in me from an early age. I went to college. I was in the first class of women at a previously all-men's school, and really learned a lot about the importance of succeeding based on what you can accomplish, not on your gender. We had to prove that we deserved to be there for a lot of people who didn't think we should be there. And so no special consideration, which really drove my perspective in large part going forward. Certainly, as Alex said, not naive enough to think that there aren't differences, but I believe that what we achieve is really up to us. And being held accountable is not gender specific. It's really based on who we are as individuals. The other thing that has always been important to me is excellent mentors who taught me about accountability and about delivering the best I could, not based on gender or on special consideration, but on what I thought was important to get a job done. So I would agree with Alex. We're leaders, and we happen to be women. There are special issues for women, but I do believe that is not what we should focus on. We should focus on doing the best job that we think we can do.
Great, thanks. And I have to add a little side note here. I just finished reading Ruth Bader Ginsburg biography and then saw the movie On the Basis of Sex over the weekend. So the whole idea of women and being groundbreaking and in areas where previously there had been few women has been, top of mind for me. So it's very interesting to hear both of your backgrounds. So Robin, give us a little bit more. You've been talking a little bit about, your background and how you've gotten to where you are, but what motivates you in the work that you're doing?
Maybe because I started in nonprofits, but I learned early on that I really have to believe in what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Mission is really important for me. There have been times in my career when roles that I've been in have not been mission-based, and that hasn't been a good fit. So when I joined CAQH, the opportunity to bring together natural competitors to have an impact on the industry was pretty exciting. And truthfully, it's what keeps me here all these years later. I also work with a lot of smart people who are aligned on a common purpose. The fact that we've grown over time enabled new positions for people to move into, to grow into, either laterally or through promotions, has been really exciting for me. We have terrific people who we lost in the early days because we didn't have those opportunities. So growth is about impact on the industry for me, which is really gratifying, but also about the ability to help our people grow. We're having a measurable impact by doing what we do for the industry, and it's why I still love coming in here every day after 18 years.
Thank you. And Alex, I know you talked quite a bit about your early motivators, but what motivates you today now?
Yeah, I think Robin really said it well about having a mission, feeling that there's a purpose to it, I think makes a big difference. So in a nutshell, I'd have to say the potential to save lives and make the lives of individuals better. You know, I've worked in a hospital, I've been a patient, I've been a visitor, I've supported my family during their healthcare episodes in both the hospital and home settings. And so I've seen and felt the stress, the fear, the confusion of being in the healthcare system. And it's overwhelming to figure out what is wrong with your health, what care to receive, and how to ensure it can be paid for when you're compromised. So my family has experienced lots of health issues, such as severe football injuries, chronic Lyme's and co-infector diseases, heart and brain diseases, joint replacements, cancers, deep personal losses, and more. I shudder from the memory of having a family member in the hospital and to have glitches in their care delivery that led my father to sit looking at me and saying, "Will you fix that?" Beyond my motivation to improve a system that helps save the ones I love, I'm further motivated by the reality that one day in the future I'll be compromised. And I want the system to focus on easing my pain, helping me get better, and to learn from the care delivery that they've rendered. I do not want my care team to be burdened with administrative overhead and minutia. I want them to be present and available to hear my story, my needs and preferences, and to work with me to chart a course to well-being. So having that family, friends, loved ones, and myself is sort of the potential in the future that I'm trying to save and help is a huge motivator and keeps you going every day.
Yes, yes. And it's great that you remind everybody that at the center of all of this really is the patient and how we are all patients and what those experiences mean to us. So moving on a little bit more on the technology side, we hear all the time about there's this chicken and egg approach to advancing technology. And so, Alex, what do you consider the role of vendors, payers, providers, patients in advancing health IT?
Well, I think advancing health IT is definitely a team sport. And Nancy, you're not going to be surprised when I say this, but I often comment that it takes a village to accomplish improving the healthcare system. You know, a patient's role is to get better and to receive support from the ecosystem. The support comes in the form of care delivery and related reimbursement aspects. This leads to how the system should function, or in other terms, the requirements for health IT. Providers and payers are important influencers of requirements, although the requirements don't always align, and industry efforts, standards committees, along with government mandates help find the middle ground to advance our health IT infrastructure. Vendors or internal IT shops enable the requirements to be fulfilled. In other words, health IT's role is to address the pain points in our business models. It should make the process work more efficiently and effectively in delivering the desired end state. Technology evolution provides promise of greater efficiencies and tools to aid our care delivery. However, it does come at a cost, and advances may stall because not everyone is a front runner. More often, there's a large install base that has strained resources, and the idea of pivoting to newer technology is a huge strain, both financially and to the degree of organizational commitment. Further, we've all become trained to respond to the national framework of standards and the related cues to move forward to an upgrade, like an NPRM or a final rule. My career has paralleled the maturation of health IT. We've come a long way since the dawn of HIPAA to today's 21st century cures, advancing interoperability objectives, and the related data convergence that comes with it. I'm seeing a push for industry to drive the speed of change and to create more predictability in the evolution of health IT, and it will take the whole village to pull it off.
Thanks. And Robin, what are your thoughts on this?
At the bottom line, I completely agree with Alex. I think collaboration is key. Aligning points of view is where forward motion really has to start. We have to appreciate the different perspectives that everybody brings to the table and the different starting places where they come from. But then the truth is somebody or an organization has to be willing to take that first step. We can't all be fast followers. You know, we see there are lots of good ideas and everybody's waiting for a mandate or for somebody else to try it first. But if change is going to happen, we need people to get off the sidelines and to put their toe in the water. So I think in terms of moving a stall, it's really about leaders looking to see all the different points of view, bringing them together and jumping out there first, because people will come behind you. But when there's no leader, when everybody is in an echo chamber and continuing the conversation, we can't make that forward motion we need to make. And so that's really where I think the crux of moving through a stall is. It's taking a lead.
Great. And that brings me to the next question that I had. Alex, we hear a lot of times that organizations won't adopt something new, technology or standards, unless they're required to. But we also know that regulations and policy can't keep pace with technology. And I know that NCVHS has developed its predictability roadmap and recommendations on how to address some of this problem. Do you have any thoughts on how we can strike a balance between the two?
That's a great question, Nancy. You know, the Standard Subcommittee of NCVHS is actively engaging industry on trying to figure out how to find that balance. Many in the industry agree that standardization is necessary and that administrative simplification has made a quantifiable difference in the volume of electronic exchange. However, more work remains to improve the system efficiencies. As industry and technologies have evolved, some aspects of the process to develop and adopt standards have become impediments rather than drivers for innovation. Simply stated, the processes take too long, contain unnecessary redundancies, are often opaque, and lack accountability of those impacted. I'd like to showcase just two of our recent recommendations to Secretary Azar. Recommendation 1 is to remove the regulatory mandate for modifications to adopted standards and move towards industry-driven upgrades. You know, current regulations and proposed and final rulemaking processes need to be modernized, and we suggested in our letter recently to Secretary Azar that HHS explore and implement ways to support use of updated transaction standards and operating rules when updates to named standards become available and when industry supports the need and timing to upgrade. This would preclude the need for some of the regulations and mitigate the problem of delayed regulations. Instead of major updates every 5 to 10 years, such as the base standards, HHS could enable smaller, more easily implemented updates supported by the industry. This would result in greater predictability and responsiveness to industry needs. More specifically, we recommended that HHS handle HIPAA and ACA transaction standard operating rule updates in the same way it allows for some code set updates, whereby periodic, routine known updates for code sets released by the responsible organization are automatically implemented. The current processes for modifications to transaction standards do not accommodate the pace at which the healthcare industry needs to address changes in technology, payment models, and patient care delivery strategies. The second recommendation I want to highlight is a recommendation 5, which is to reevaluate the function and purpose of the designated standards maintenance organizations. The enabling regulation, which named the designated standards maintenance organizations, or DSMOs, was published in August 17, 2000. To learn more about the DSMOs, I suggest you attend an upcoming WEDI webinar on the topic where Deb Strickland, a fellow NCVHS subcommittee member, will deliver an overview. The DSMO regulation sets a process in motion for named organizations to collaborate, execute an MOU, develop processes to evaluate modifications to standards, and make recommendations to NCVHS regarding the readiness of updated standards for adoption. In turn, this would enable NCVHS to make recommendations to the Secretary to adopt. NCVHS believes that the DSMO Steering Committee has accomplished its original mission and charter intended by the rule adopted 20 years ago. Changes in the healthcare standards environment and the need for harmonization of administrative and clinical standards requires an updated mission for the DSMO. In the committee's assessment, a new stewardship role will necessitate participation by additional organizations and wider collaboration among the SDOs and the operating rule authoring entities, such as CAQH Core. NCVHS has launched a new project that will include significant cross-industry engagement to further inform recommendations to help support this evaluation.
Great. And Robin, I know that CAQH has been involved in this really at the intersection of this advancements and regulatory requirements. What are your thoughts in this area?
CAQH Core was created really, and the operating rules were developed to build on the standards and address industry needs between standard versions. So I would say early on understood that the industry has needs that need to be addressed in a much quicker window of time. Today, in addition to building on what we've already accomplished with operating rules, we're developing new ways to speed up the process so that we can address industry needs in a much more flexible and agile way, in addition to beginning to look at the potential for pilots to also help move the industry forward more quickly. Not to repeat all the points that Alex made, but earlier we did write a letter to NCVHS urging HHS to use the flexibility granted in existing statutes and regulations to enable accelerated adoption of updates to standards and operating rules rather than embark on additional rulemaking, which, as we all know, is very time-consuming and slows down industry innovation. So I'm not going to go into that in depth as Alex has, but we absolutely support that position.
Nancy, can I just add on to something that Robin said earlier? Because I think the aspect of that she touched upon with piloting and testing is really critical. We need those leaders who want to kick the tires on new standards and upgrades to really prove out they work before we adopt them. And so I think that that's another aspect that, in addition to our earlier discussions, I'd like to pull back in that we need to promote and facilitate that voluntary testing of new standards or emerging versions, because I think that that'll help us with garner better efficiencies.
Great point. So Robin, with all the work that you've been involved in and what you've seen within the industry, what do you think are the biggest achievements we've made so far related to health IT?
I think there are three areas that we've started to make real progress and need to continue to push forward. Certainly the EHR and the implementation of electronic record, while painful and still not anywhere near the potential, has really created a sea change in starting to make information available in a meaningful way to providers. And so that, to me, as we look at the last 10, 15 years, has been a very important step forward. I think also increasing the focus and respect on the consumer, the patient, starting to make available to them information that they need to take responsibility for their own care is a really important movement. And as we think about Blue Button 2, and all the other activities, not just that the industry specifically is creating, but also that all the mobile apps we see out there to integrate into the care delivery process are really starting to take shape in a way that patients will be better able to take care of themselves and to work in a more responsible and hopefully more successful way with the industry. And then, of course, the movement that we're making in interoperability and the new proposed regs, we need to get there sooner rather than later. Certainly, over the years, we've tried CHINs and we've tried RIOs and we have tried HIEs, and all of these were just not quite ready for prime time. And I think at this point, we can't wait any longer. We really need to kick this into the end zone. So those are the three areas where I would really focus.
Okay. And Alex, same question. What do you see as the industry's biggest achievements?
Yeah, I really like Robin's list. Some of it overlaps with mine and really calls out some very important tenets around educated and engaged consumers, the interoperability aspects. And so, when I was preparing my thoughts for today, getting data digitized was at the top of my list. I think it's key to help us deliver better care now and into the future. Unfortunately, this took investing precious tax dollars into the healthcare industry to force adoption of health IT, since our industry doesn't seem to find the natural incentives to do so like other industries. I don't know that we had much of a choice but to do it that way to get us a groundswell of digitized data. And we needed widespread health IT adoption to capture and exchange it if we're going to attain the further efficiencies. It was good to know that we at least leveraged much of the groundbreaking work spurred by President Bush's executive order in 2004. And I think that really also speaks to the iterative building block nature that we've had on the bipartisan issue of healthcare. Industry leaders applying lessons learned is another achievement I want to call out. Specifically, I can point to the Da Vinci Project as an example of thoughtful leadership by those who've been through the HIPAA and the high-tech days. They felt the pain, and their past experiences have led them to fund Da Vinci's project, supporting a variety of layers consisting of a team of consultants and vendors to work with business and technical experts in defining and testing the standards-based information exchange infrastructure our nation so critically needs for value-based care models. And it will be leveraging fast healthcare interoperability resources, or the API FHIR standards. But I think probably to wrap up my thoughts on this, last but not least, is the commitment to the public and private collaboration. We all have a diverse set of perspectives and considerations, and to be able to blend those and design something that's bigger and better than any one of us, we need to come together and put those on the table and collaboratively work through them. I think the level of collaboration is stronger now than it ever has been.
So what do you see as the barriers for what we need to still overcome?
So NCVHS has provided me with a wonderful forum to gather diverse perspectives representing views of our industry. Over the past 6 years, I've listened to the testimony of hundreds of healthcare industry participants. A theme that clearly emerged, especially under the recent predictability roadmap efforts, is that the industry wants to drive progress and the adoption of changes more than ever. It'll be interesting to see if they truly mean it and sustain their interest. A second barrier relates to our evolution and the governance processes that have emerged over time. Our system is complex and has multidimensional layers that support our primary purpose, safe patient care. The complexities and the realistic capacity of our workers and leaders presents real-world daily challenges in understanding all the pieces and their interconnectedness. To remember how we got here and to have workers and leaders alike understand how to navigate our complex healthcare system. In a landscape of competing priorities and precious resources, it is very challenging to get the support needed to fulfill our roles in developing and maintaining national standards for transactions and operating rules on which business models thrive, while the interests of leadership evolve, shifting resources to newer, fancier, or seemingly more interesting priorities. Further, we have an industry with diverse and sometimes perverse incentives. With value-based care, we're shifting the incentives to focus on patient outcomes. Technology is helping us with the multi-pronged care delivery team model. Approximately a fifth of our nation's economy is fueled by healthcare. We need to carefully consider the impact to our workforce as we design improvements to the healthcare ecosystem of care delivery and reimbursement models. In short, change must be carefully planned so as to not be more disruptive and create unintended consequences worse than the ones we're trying to fix. So those are just a few of the barriers I see.
Okay. And Robin, what are your thoughts on the barriers?
I think that to Alex's earlier point, collaboration is an important way to meaningful progress. Agreeing that on things that no one organization can do or no one stakeholder group can do on their own, agreement on what will have the most impact. So I think that's an important barrier, getting outside your own organization and your own stakeholder group. I think another barrier is that people start in different places, as I mentioned earlier, and understanding that we're not all going to move at the same time, and the expectation that we can or will is not realistic. And so figuring out ways that the industry can transition over time, recognizing realities, I think is something that we need to move through. The allocation of resources, and every organization, there's a deep fight for IT resource every single year and every single month. That is a huge barrier to making progress. And so how do we work our way through that barrier? Letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, I think, is also a barrier. We're always looking for the silver bullet. There is no silver bullet. This is all really, really hard work. And it's not fun because we're not going to get there as fast as we'd like to. But appreciating progress as we make it and acknowledging that is I think, something that will help us move through as well. And then Alex talked about the public-private. I think that there are areas that we are making progress there, but I think there are other areas where we need to be more open to that potential. This is one industry, and there are private programs and there are public programs, but we're all working towards the same objectives. And if we could better align and work across those groups, I think that we will break down some additional barriers. So those are the ones that came to mind as I was thinking this through.
Interesting. Yeah. So one of our attendees has a three-part question. So the questions are, what challenges have you experienced that you believe apply to women in health IT and leadership roles? How did you overcome those challenges? And then what advice do you have for women experiencing similar challenges in this industry? So Robin, I'll start with you.
Broadly in my career, I've been very fortunate in not having challenges that I think specifically relate to being a woman. Having said that, I will say that as I moved into IT and responsibilities in the IT arena, it did feel different. And it was a number of years ago, and there were not a lot of women leaders in health IT back then. And so the thing that I remember most vividly is that I didn't know who to talk to. I didn't feel like there were people who understood what I was going through and where I was confident that I could speak freely and not show any weakness. And thankfully found some strong mentors, although it was very hard to find women mentors in that space. And so I didn't. I decided that I would find mentors who could help me more broadly. And thankfully over time that has changed. But I do think that women need to be better to women and more open to women. My observations over time is that women can be harder on women because the expectations are greater. And I think we need to take the time to reflect on that and really reach out specifically to help younger women grow in a way that we had not historically.
Good
so
points.
my advice in that respect is to really take the time to seek out, pay attention. I mean, at this point, there's so much more information out there on the web. There are people who are visible through seminars, through conferences, through education sessions, to learn who might be a good fit and reach out, because they're going to be happy to hear from you and they're going to be willing to take the time that others didn't take back when we were coming out.
Great, those are all good points. Alex, how about you? Do you want me to repeat those questions?
No, I think I've got it, about the challenges and how do you overcome them, and the advice that you'd like me to kind of round out. Robin's excellent comments. She really had some great remarks and lessons learned there, and so I'm going to try to add to them and not duplicate her thoughtful offerings. And I've experienced challenges with both men and women who are not as strong as I am and may not enjoy a healthy debate as much as I do, and enjoy exploring a topic to see if it from multiple angles, to go beyond my initial views and to identify a more comprehensive understanding, as getting it right is really important to me. As a woman, assertiveness can be inferred as aggressiveness, and when someone is conflict avoidant or unwilling to show what they don't know, they are more likely to be withdrawn or not engage collaboratively. This makes it really challenging in the work environment. My desire to make forward progress is uncomfortable for some, and challenging the status quo trips other people's buttons, and that can create backlash that's both seen and unseen. So you need to be very observant to what's happening or what's not happening in your interactions. I think overcoming and advice aspects that I'd add to the list that Robin gave. First, building on the find an expert to help hone your skills and approach. I think finding mentors or even a professional coach is a winning strategy that I would recommend to folks. Having that neutral, independent party where you can have a safe space and place to be yourself, to try out phrasing and think through thoughts and ramifications of actions is very important. To helping people be thoughtful in your choices and actions, to also be thoughtful of and nurture relationships. It's a far smaller ecosystem than we sometimes realize. And just because you may not engage with somebody throughout all of the phases of your healthcare IT career, you will likely trip into them at some point again. I think it's important to learn from the journey and the experiences, and to spend time on understanding yourself and embracing your strengths and weaknesses. Strengths can trip into weaknesses when you're stressed or you're overutilizing them. And so there's some things to be mindful of. And then you could also work with a professional coach or a mentor to strengthen yourself and be as well-rounded as you possibly can in your leadership roles. It's very much of a journey that should be enjoyed.
Great. So let's start looking towards the future. So Robin, if we're looking ahead 5 years, what are one or two issues that we have today that you really hope we have resolved in that time?
Well, the biggest one is that we should no longer be using fax machines. Just kidding. But we joke all the time about that, so I thought I would throw that in there. Two things that I think about are two things I mentioned earlier where we have made progress, but we haven't made enough, and that is, as we know, we're just starting to help the patient consumer step into their roles. So I think we need to, hopefully in 5 years, we will have gotten them the right information at the right time to make informed decisions. So that's my number one. And my number two is the full-on interoperability, including particularly the connection between the clinical and the admin, which I think value-based models will certainly facilitate. But that interoperability, we can see it. We can see it really close, and we just need to get there. And I would think within the next 5 years, we should be able to accomplish that.
Okay. And Alex, what are your one or two items that you really want to see fixed?
I think as we move forward, the convergence of administrative and clinical data is key. Our data is about citizens' healthcare journey, and we use that data in a whole bunch of ways to deliver care and to promote wellness in our communities, including public health and research efforts. It's captured in the EHR, and to get a more glideful path for all of us towards the converging of that administrative and clinical data is probably my number one item. I also think having an industry that understands and appreciates and supports the standards communities, whether it's business or technical in nature, is pretty important. I do think, agree with Robin that we need to have citizens that are actively engaged, and I think they also need to fully understand their rights and responsibilities related to their well-being and their data. And finally, I'd say to create parity in our healthcare delivery system for all citizens and the workers within the system, regardless of their zip code.
Great, great. Well, hopefully, 5 years from now, we'll invite you back and hopefully we can talk about how wonderful our healthcare system is because those have all been fixed. So we're starting to wind down here in the time we have together. So I want to give each of you a chance to give some parting thoughts. And so starting with you, Alex, is there any sort of parting wisdom that you wish to pass on to the next group of women leaders?
Yeah, thinking about this, I tried to narrow down my thoughts, and so I have a brief 13 points that I'd like to make. The first one is to persevere, accept and don't take it personally that you aren't going to please everyone, and being a disruptive change agent means that you are in for some very challenging conversations. 2, surround yourself with folks that are different than you, as they will help you see alternative approaches and enhance your likelihood of success. 3, change is the only guarantee, and it happens at the speed of trust. 4, as a leader, be thoughtful on when and how to pay the piper. You're going to pay the piper one way or another in scope, schedule, and budget, so plan accordingly. 5, champions are key to every initiative. 6, teams are key. Build, support, value, and reward often. 7, establish processes and trust them to guide work efforts of you and your teams. 8, know your landscape and your influencers. Be informed and have a strategy for knowledge tune-ups. 9, listen, learn, and apply. This includes knowing your limitations. 10, see technology as an enabler and a resource rather than a dictator. 11, appreciate that not all data is good data. Be sure you use good data to make decisions. 12, communicate in abundance. And the final thought is embrace change and enjoy the Ferris wheel.
Sounds like you've got some headings there for some interesting chapters in a health management book.
Well, maybe we should all write a book. We'll talk about that offline.
Yeah. So Robin, what kind of wisdom do you have for the next generation?
Well, in addition to all of Alex's, which certainly resonate, a few personal reflections here. So reflect on your accomplishments and be confident in them. Take joy in what you can see you've done. There's a social psychologist, Amy Cuddy, who talks about the Wonder Woman pose. It's on YouTube. You guys should take a look at it. You just stand there in the Wonder Woman pose and be confident in who you are and what you've accomplished. There was a Harvard Business Review article quite a while ago about the imposter syndrome, and I find that when you talk to women, we tend to feel this more than men do. Fear of faking it, and we need to move past it because we are amazing. So I would really, one of my big points is to move past the imposter syndrome. Always be involved in organizations outside of work or activities outside of work, whether they be on boards or whether they be artistic or athletic. You need to move our brains into areas other than what we do all those hours a day. And it's so easy to just continue to do them, particularly now. It didn't used to be quite as easy, but now it's an around-the-clock event. Take the time to do things outside of work because it gives you a different perspective on not just your life, but on the work that you do. I find that really, really helpful. And then lastly, I would absolutely say and encourage you to learn to say no. It is so hard to do that, but it's really critical to enable you to be effective at what you know you have to do. It's so easy to get into tangential activities or to take on additional projects because you want to satisfy people, but you need to satisfy yourself and you need to learn to say no.
That is great advice too. Wow, you guys really do have, really did have some good wisdom to pass on for our audience members. So at this point, Sam, I'll turn it back over to you and see if anyone in our audience has questions that they'd like to ask.
Thanks, Nancy. So if any of our attendees have any questions, make sure you type them into your GoToWebinar control panel and hit enter, and we can ask our wonderful panelists those questions. And don't forget, we will be having our next WEDI Women in Health IT breakfast at the 2019 Spring Conference, which is next month. So make sure you register for the conference, and I'll be sending email invitations to everybody for more information on that breakfast. But it'll be another fantastic event where we can network and get great advice, and really looking forward to it. And also wanted to let you know, if you have not already registered for our spring conference, I wanted to share the special discount code with y'all. So just include the WEDI Spring discount code on your during your registration process. And I'll be sending these slides to all of you, so you'll have that just in case you don't have a pen and paper to jot it down right now. And so far, we haven't had any other questions coming in, but I would like to ask our fantastic panelists a question myself. What do you, since this is a WEDI webinar and a WEDI audience, what do you have advice? What advice do you have for WEDI moving forward, and what can we do to better serve the industry?
I'll go ahead and start. I think the educational aspects are really important, and sort of multi-pronged aspects of the education. First is helping people to understand the basics. How does the process work? What are the regulations? I mean, we've got several decades at least of frameworks related to privacy, security, transactions, identifiers. So I think the WEDI opportunity to help people understand what are the pieces of the puzzle and how do they fit together is wonderful. The second piece that I think is really important is the policy advisory groups and the frameworks of bringing those diverse participants like Robin talked about, where we have people in different points within the system having different types of requirements and perspectives to be able to bring the diverse views together and have a collaborative voice bubble up from which WEDI then testifies and presents those findings to influence the national policy landscape, I think are two examples of how WEDI will help the industry be very strong in influencing the direction that we take in the future.
I would just echo Alex's points. I would also say that staying on top of where the industry is going and taking on those issues that will build on what WEDI has accomplished over the years, but make sure that you're moving ahead to where the puck is, if you will, so that you keep current and keep on top of, maybe in fact getting out ahead rather than having to retrofit or revisit, making sure that the topics that you guys deal with are the ones that are the future and not just the present.
That's a really good point.
Yes, again, more good advice. I'll ask a quick question. What advice do you have for someone who is maybe looking to ask someone to be a mentor for them? Is there a good way to approach that conversation?
For me, make sure it's someone who knows you, so that you can be comfortable talking to them about your strengths and your weaknesses and areas where you would like help. So be honest, be open, and make sure that they understand the context within which you're asking. I think those are the things that I would think about.
I think those are really good points, Robin. I think you're making sure the other person is clear that you're asking them to be a mentor. It's one thing when you know you want to work in a safe space with someone, so they, the idea that they know you, they have some sense of your history. They may, ideally they might have a sense of who your whole being is. So often we have people who know a swath of our lives, our work lives or our personal lives or our extracurricular focus. But to have somebody who has that full breadth is ideal, but they need to understand that you're asking them to take on a role as a mentor, because that brings for the mentor some different perspectives and thoughtfulness about what they're trying to accomplish in a conversation, as opposed to maybe just being in the, hey, I'm your friend sort of interchange.
Okay, good.
I would also just add that it's important to talk to them about their willingness to do this over time, because the mentorship is not just a short-term interaction. The most meaningful mentor relationships are ones that last, quite frankly, over years, or certainly over a period of a couple of years. Otherwise, it's hard to see the outcome at the other end. So I would make sure that the person you're asking is comfortable making that kind of a commitment.
Okay. Well, I didn't see any questions come in from the audience. I take that to mean that we had a wonderful, well-rounded, robust conversation, and we left no questions for anyone to ask. So with that, I just want to take the time to thank you, Alex and Robin. It's been really wonderful to talk to you today and really get to know both of you and your careers and your thoughts around all of these issues with health IT. I think this has been very valuable, for me. I hope for the audience as well. So I really want to thank you for your time. And Sam, is there any other cleanup end points that you need to make?
Just thank everybody, and especially Nancy, thank you for pulling this all together. I really appreciate it, and I will be following up with all of our attendees with the link to for the recording and the slide deck, and feel free to share with your colleagues or anybody that you think would benefit from this webinar. We definitely encourage you to share it. It's free for everybody. So thank you again to Nancy and our wonderful panelists. We really appreciate everybody's participation today.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you.